Hello, good afternoon to everyone. I am Jaume Massons and welcome to these sessions from this program, EAE Entrepreneurs Experience. And obviously, you already know this program or these activities addresses all aspects around entrepreneurship. And well, I greet you and also I invite you to follow all the session with our expert because you are going to get some nice and important insights. Then obviously we are recording this session in order to allow you to watch it live on stream, but also later on. Then this activity is an initiative promoted by the Alumni Association. You already know that this is a project from the school that offers large areas of service to students, which are 5 areas: knowledge, professional development, networking, benefits, and discounts. Having said that, the main, let's say, title of this session is Startups, Methodology of Creation. But as you will find out later on, through the expert, we're going to give you a nice perspective of or when creating a startup business. Then let me introduce our expert, Rohit Gadkar. He is a FinTech enthusiast. You can have a look at LinkedIn, and a private investor, and he's got more than 20 years in the FinTech or financial sector as a portfolio manager. And the last 8 years, he's developing our own project after selling or exiting from the previous company called Bear Stearns. Right now, he's running Trea as asset management.
That was my prior.
Is your prior, okay. And well, right now he's teasing with the idea of creating a startup or building up an alliance in order to create a FinTech project with a solid basis. He will have chance to explain about it. And yes, and also let me remind you that you can use the hashtag EAE conference in order to make any question or any comments that you want to share with the audience or with me in order to embed your questions within our conversation. So yeah, we're going to be around an hour, so don't sleep. Be alert and drop us your questions. And yeah, I will be moderating, so I'm happy and to be sharing this experience with you guys, and also I hope to learn as much as you will do. So yeah, Rohit, let's start if you don't mind.
Thank you very much.
Would you mind to introduce yourself and make an extension of what I said before?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Jaume, for having me here. And no, I think you did a good summary. So I basically, I'm relatively new to Spain. I'm not Spanish. I think it's kind of clear, right? But yeah, so I'm American, and so I spent most of my professional career in New York and London. And I'm also old, so it goes back a long ways, right? So I think I started in the mid-90s, sort of by luck in the financial field, to be honest with you. I mean, I wanted to be a lawyer, and I worked for a year in a law firm in New York and decided it was the most boring thing ever, right? So then I kind of got lucky and got a job in the mid-90s in a company called BlackRock, which I think is quite famous now, right? But back then it was just a tiny little company, and but anyway, it got me started in the field. It got it kind of made me realize that that's what I wanted to do with my career, and then ever since then I've had various jobs in finance, with BlackRock, and then I worked at a small EM hedge fund for a while, emerging markets, which is, we call it EM. But and then I worked for some big companies like Goldman Sachs and Bear Stearns before the crisis, right? In 2008, 2009, and so it's true. Most of my career has been in the financial field, managing money, advising companies and countries on issuing debt. So I finally ended up in Spain in 2009, which was at a company called Treya Capital Partners, which is still around today. And it started by a guy named Carlos Tusquets, who's quite well known, I think, here in Spain. And I think Carlos and I got along well, and he offered me the opportunity to do something a little bit entrepreneurial, I would say, within kind of a bigger platform, which is to create the emerging markets business at Treya, right? So, I was responsible really for launching my own products, building a team, et cetera, right? And I did that for about 9 years before I decided to, pursue other opportunities. And then, now for the last year and a half, I've been kind of focused a little bit more on the kind of the startups, the pure startup side, which is exploring some opportunities in the FinTech space. Which is kind of the combination of finance and technology, right? So, no, it's been very interesting. I'm like you said. I mean, I haven't really made a firm decision on the way that I'm going to go, but it's going to be either creating my own company within that sector, or joining potentially, or teaming up, collaborating with the kind of maybe an existing platform. So that's kind of my background, and that's
I definitely see that your experience and background will give some light to startup managers and also maybe entrepreneurs that they are seeking, or they feel that they will need finance support at some stage of the life cycle of a startup. So let's kick off. You said that you have been in the US and also London, which are maybe the two main hubs in the world, I would say. How do you see the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Spain?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, I think that obviously, it's hard to compare the US to not just Spain, but any other country, right? I mean, I think if you talk about startups and, kind of entrepreneurship, I think the US is probably the first country that comes to mind. I mean, you have companies like Google, Facebook, Apple, all the big tech kind of startups are based out of the U.S. So the ecosystem there, I think, is quite developed, right? I mean, it's compared to countries like Spain and even the UK, maybe. I mean, I think the UK is probably maybe second in line, right? So, but I think but even I would say that even in the kind of 8-9 years that I've been in Spain, I think that there's been an amazing development here in Spain in terms of the kind of the startup ecosystem, right? I mean, you've had a lot of companies that have had very successful exits, right, over the last 3-4 years, and you've had companies like Glovo and a lot of the kind of Wallapop and all these guys who've gotten a lot of publicity and a lot of press, right, which has also helped, right? And you always see now. Barcelona is one of the kind of top 2 or 3 cities in Europe in terms of entrepreneurship. So, look, I think that it's come a long ways. It's come a long ways, and I think it has a long ways to go. But I see it changing quite rapidly, especially in terms of the VC sector and kind of I think one thing people don't understand about entrepreneurship is that you have the entrepreneur, but then you have like an entire ecosystem around it, right? Suppliers, vendors, service providers. And then, VC funds and, all the other investment infrastructure, right? And that takes time. That takes time to evolve. And I think that over the last, I would say, 2, 3, 4 years, Spain has really, that part has really developed quite a bit. I mean, you see a lot of accelerators here now, which you didn't see 3, 4 years ago. VC funds are getting bigger. There's a lot more angel investing, for example. So yeah, no, I mean, it's encouraging. So I think it's, let's see how it develops. But I think it's.
Actually, yeah, it's exciting to see how the ecosystem that you mentioned is evolving and also growing. Do you think that the finance sector, the traditional one, is connected to the startup ecosystem or world? And what is it like here in Spain or Catalonia?
You're talking about in terms of the investors?
Yes, in terms
the
of
venture capital, all that
yeah.
stuff. Yeah, look, I mean, I think it's developing. Let's put it this way. I think that, traditionally, I think a lot of companies in Spain were financed kind of through friends and family, connections, maybe, but I think that's changing. I think it's becoming a more professional environment. I think there's a lot more, I mean, just in my time here, I mean, I've seen, many VC funds pop up, right? And I think that's in response to kind of the opportunities that are here, right? Because I mean, I think that, if you want to invest in because the way it used to be I think in Spain is that, if you were a successful company here, you went for money abroad, right? A lot of the companies which had successful exits here raised money from international VCs, right? And now that's changing, right? I mean, I think you have a lot more locally based VCs here and in Madrid as well, who are starting to kind of look for local companies, right? So I think the first round, or kind of like the seed round, Series A, these kind of rounds, a lot of them are being financed by local players, and then obviously international players come in later, right? So I think that's encouraging, because I think it's kind of a virtuous cycle, let's say, where I think that the more success you have locally, the more money is going to be attracted locally, right? I mean, instead of
a magnet effect, right?
And let's be honest. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, the local guys, they're the ones who probably have more insight into. I mean, it makes sense for local investors to invest in local companies because they're there, right? I mean, it's kind of like when I was in New York. I mean, it's, I went. It just, when you're living in a city like New York, like when I went to a business school at Columbia, for example, which is in New York City, and the one thing that we used to always say is like it's great to go to business school in New York, because you're in the city where all the jobs are, right? So you're able to go to all the companies and knock on their doors, and say hello. I mean, it's when you're going to school, for example, in somewhere far away, it's impossible to do that, right? So I think being a local is a massive advantage in terms of due diligence, in terms of kind of so I think it's great for Spain.
To be having this
Yeah,
boost in investment and
exactly.
also,
Yeah, definitely. I think especially the earlier rounds. I think now, I mean, the kind of the angel seed, rounds. I think that there's money. There's a lot of money here for those kind of investments. I think that, I think the larger rounds, as you get kind of the Series A, B, and farther up, I think we're still probably lacking a bit. But
Okay,
it's a natural evolution.
Okay, excellent. And then I understand that you find out that there is a gap in different sectors, startups, ecosystem, and you spoke about your potential project in FinTech, but let's speak about FinTech, and also what other sectors do you think that are becoming big in Spain?
Well, there's a lot. I mean, there's a lot of big Spanish successful startups. I think a lot of them are in the services sectors, right? I mean, kind of, the delivery and all these, kind of providing services, right? Which is great. I mean, it's definitely something that was lacking, in Spain. For example, when I came here 9 years ago, I mean, it was impossible to get delivery to your house. And I used to always think, like, I was living in New York for 15 years, and in the mid-90s, I mean, you could go get delivery to your apartment by 5 different places, So it's coming. I mean, I think that there were a lot of services that I think that were lacking here that are now being the market's being addressed through the startup space. I think that there's a variety of startups. I wouldn't say there's I don't know if there's any particular sector which is dominant. I think FinTech is one which is actually underrepresented, to be honest with you. Just because I think historically the kind of the financial sophistication in Spain was not super high, right? I mean, it continues to be. I don't mean in Spain. I think in many countries, right? I know it's. So I think that there's a, it's kind of like I always think in my mind, right? It's maybe the market is not so big, but it's an underserved market, right? So there's a big opportunity, right? I mean, I think FinTech is the same way. I think that, I think that most FinTechs that are starting in Spain, their idea is to start here and then go abroad quickly because to scale up, right? Because I think, with a population of 40 million, I mean, I think New York City probably has 15, right? So yeah, and you have an entire country that has 40. So the sheer size of the country is very small in terms of the global picture, but on the other hand, it's underserved and underpenetrated, right? Which I think that, if you do something, if you create something that adds value, there's a big opportunity here.
And do you think that FinTech and startups, as they have this, let's say the main driver, innovation, will change the mentality? Because before the interview, you spoke about traditional mindset in investing.
I think so, yeah, and I already see it changing, to be honest with you. I think that it's going to take time. It's going to take time. I mean, it's clear that it's going to take time, but I think, look, it's going to happen, right? I mean, I think that after the crisis, things changed. Not just here, but everywhere, right? I mean, I think in terms of, there was a certain kind of apprehension about the markets and kind of maybe I wouldn't say it's a mistrust, but people saw the banking scandals and everything that was going on, right? And I think the new generation that's coming up has a kind of a, they're open to a different way of thinking, because they grew up when the world was collapsing, right? So I think they're willing to try different things. I think that the traditional kind of players in the market, right? I mean, I'm not saying that they're I don't want to say anything negative about them, but it's just that, I think that this all of a sudden an opportunity opened up, right? That maybe wouldn't have opened up if the crisis hadn't happened, right? And I think that a lot of people are open to that. So I think that I don't know if that answers the question, but
we're framing the
yeah. I mean, look, I think it's changing here. I do think it's changing. I think it's happening slowly, but I think it's happening. I mean, if you look at the it's still in the early stages, right? I mean, I think there's and that's, to be honest with you, I think that the movement away from the banks and the traditional asset management players, it's early, but it's going to happen, right? Because in my mind, it makes all the sense in the world, right? Because if you have all of a sudden, and it's a question of education, and it's educating the public on a lot of these kind of issues, right? But somebody's going to do it. Somebody's could do it, right?
Also, and maybe giving other tools to,
exactly.
minor or small
I mean, look,
investors.
if you're 20 years old today or 25, I mean, your phone is your entire. I mean, you have no problem using your phone to do anything, including investing, right? So, it opens up an entire new channel for it's an entire new distribution channel, right? For delivering financial products, for example, right? And
actually, yes, I do agree, because here in Spain, the last 5-10 years, platforms like crowdfunding, crowd lending platforms have been more popular.
Yeah.
And people are engaged knowing that they are not big investors, that they can participate, and
Exactly.
they can also support specific projects that in other ways they would not get the support.
Yeah. I think we were speaking about this a little bit before, right? I mean, which is that, I think the segment of the market which has been severely underserved is kind of. I mean, if you're rich, right? I mean, people are coming to you. I mean, here, there, anywhere, right? I mean, that's not a problem. I mean, I'm not saying they're going to give you good advice, but at least you're going to get attention, right? I think the advice is another whole story, but at least people are going to knock on your door. But if you're kind of in the middle class, let's say, or you have some money and you want to invest it, and you don't know how to invest it, right? I think that the private banks and the traditional players are not coming for you. So then it's a part of the market which is underserved, right? They have some money, they don't want to keep it in the bank earning 0%, right? But they don't know what to do with it, right? So I think this is an opportunity. I mean, it's an opportunity for somebody like me to come in and offer a product which is very easy to use, right? Explained very well, very simply, on and has low fees, right? I mean, this is another thing, which is
And benefiting as well.
benefiting
startups,
well, and also, exactly.
because the portfolio will be a combination of startup projects with evaluation or assets evaluation that you will
Yeah.
convey to your clients.
Yeah, I mean, look, so it's going to be a very simple tool, let's put it this way, a very simple, user-friendly tool,
True.
very transparent. I think, transparency is something which I think people want. People are tired of going to a bank and being sold something that they have no idea what they're investing in, right? So I think that this is something which creates mistrust, right? When a bank sells you something that you don't have an idea what they're doing, and many times the people who are selling you the product also have no idea what they're selling, right? So I think that ease of use, transparency, simplicity, and low fees, right? I mean, don't charge crazy fee. I mean, the problem is that the traditional infrastructure has so many mouths to feed that the only way they can feed all the people is to charge high fees. And the people who lose out in this scenario are investors, right? I mean, I can tell you because I was, for 25 years, I was a manager. And the only person, not the only person, because I think, but that's not fair to say, but I think that, I mean, who was making money from this? I was making money because I'm charging you fees. And when I charge you fees, who loses? It's the investor, right? Because it comes from your pocket.
Profit is less.
And the shame in the industry is that, and I think this is something that I mentioned to you too, but which is that I think something like 95% of portfolio managers are not even able to beat the index that they're managing against, right? So not only are they not beating the market, they're charging you, often 2-3% fees, which I think it's just it's a shame, So I think that's what I'm trying to change.
That's good. How would what would be the best fit or the best profile to be considered within your portfolio?
Well, like I said, I mean, I think anybody. I mean, I think that my idea is that, I understand, I think that, everybody has their own kind of risk profile, right? I mean, there's some investors who are more conservative and there's some investors who are more risky, not just because of their own personal taste, but also where they are in their age, their life, et cetera, right? So I think you have to take into consideration, you don't want to sell somebody who's 70 years old the same portfolio you're going to sell somebody who's 20 years old, right? It's clear, right? So I think that depending on your risk profile, I think that, that my idea is that to create a portfolio for you, which is very low cost and cheap and made up of passive investments products, like so is that
Yeah, more or less.
Yeah.
The idea here is also to give some not tips, advices on how to build up value from the startup point of view to then appeal to maybe fintech companies or investors directly. But this is a hard work. So to address investors and pitch, it's a lot of time spending activity.
Yeah. So are you talking about investors meaning like VCs, or are you talking about investors meaning people who want to use the product? Because in my case, there's two different. So one person is who wants to use the product, right? The person, it could be you, it could be anybody.
User. Or
so the user, right, and who is also an investor, because they're going to be investing in a portfolio that I create, right? So that's one. And then the other side is kind of the investor in my company, or investor in any company, but not an investor, not a user of the product, but a VC or an angel investor, or
seeking profit, or
who are investing in the company, right? So. I think in this case, are you talking about
I was speaking about
the user or the
investors?
The investors, I see. Okay.
But it's true that some crowdfunding platforms are also engaging users to secure, let's say, the prototype or the first launching. The kind of they are called reward crowdfunding platforms. So it's another. Let's say, creative manner to get early buyers in.
Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, I have a mixed kind of opinion on funding. I call it this the funding, right? The funding of the startup. I mean, I think that Look, I mean, I think if you have a revenue model which doesn't need funding, don't go get funding. I mean, why are you getting funding, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think if you can scale your business from day
On your
one.
own?
I mean, I think funding is kind of a double-edged sword, right? Because obviously, when you get funding, you're giving up equity in your company,
True.
right? So if you don't have to do that, don't do it, right? But the reality is that it's very.
Organic growth is hard.
Yes. So to find a business model where you can grow organically and you don't need funding, outside funding, is very hard, right? So, if you have the resources to bootstrap your own company, and I realize that most people don't, right? And I think it's very hard, right? I think that personally, I would do it this way, because when you start bringing in outside investors into your company,
You're diluting your.
well, you're diluting your economics, but you're also bringing in another opinion, and I think that it often hurt, depending on what kind of investor you have, but it often, I've seen a lot of companies that, the original founders end up leaving the company when outside investors come, because the outside investors just are, they have their own opinion. Which, to some extent, it makes sense, because I mean, if a VC is putting in 5 million or whatever, I mean, they want their say on how the company is run. Some VCs, others no.
You
right?
raised an issue that happens.
I think that I think that it depends. I mean, I think it depends on how. On the other hand, I think that if it's better to dilute yourself. If, for example, if you don't dilute yourself, you're not going to have a company, right? So it's a tricky situation. I mean, I think that the reality is that unless you have some metrics, okay, unless you have some revenue, unless you've created a product and you have the professional investors these days, it's going to be hard. They're not going to look at you, right? I mean, I'm talking about VCs, right? I mean, VCs are not going to look at a PowerPoint, and they'll look at it, but it's very unlikely they're going to give you $2 million on a PowerPoint, right? Or $1 million, or euros. So I think, you have to be creative, I think, at the beginning. I mean, I think that, I think friends, family, whether it's some angel investors, you have to...
money, right?
You have to be very clear. I mean, this is something that, I think that if you go to a VC and say, yeah, I think... No. I mean, you have to be very professional, and you have to be very clear. You have to have a business plan. You better be able to tell them exactly what you're going to use the money for, right? I mean, if you go in there and it's like, I need this and I don't, forget it. I mean, you're done. It's too competitive. It's too competitive right now. I mean, I think that, I think that if you go to a VC, you need to have
and sometimes it's a one-shot situation, so...
You need to have your story clear, right? And I think you need to prepare, you need to be professional, and I think this is something which is a challenge for some people who are, I mean, I think if you're in your early 20s or mid-20s and, you're a tech guy, for example, you have no idea about finance, it could be hard. I mean, unless you have a product which is just a killer product.
This is
right?
something that I wanted to ask you. Would you recommend this tech guy to get external advising to, beef up or feel?
I think that as an entrepreneur, you need to be resourceful as possible. I mean, meaning that, mentors, advisors. I mean, they're invaluable. Invaluable. I mean, I think that I think you should spend a lot of time talking to people who've gone through the process before, other entrepreneurs, other guys who've had successful exits. I mean, I realize that all the time you don't have access to some of these guys, right? But look, I mean, there's a lot of resources out there. I mean, I think that you need to be resourceful. I think that you need to seek out advice. You need to read as much as possible about. I mean, there's plenty of resources on the web today about financing, about how it works. I mean, I think it's very. And the other thing you can do is that, look, I think that it's, and this is my experience, personal experience now. It's good to have a team. It's not one person, right? You need to have a good team. I think it's very key. I mean, VCs will, I mean, one thing that they will look for example, if you're in that stage of funding, is that they will look at your team. They want to make sure that it's not one guy, right? Because what happens if that guy leaves?
Also full-time engaged.
I mean, one guy can't do everything. I mean, so I think that you need to, one advice I would give is try to find other co-founders who have different skill sets than you, right? So I mean, for example, if you're a finance guy, maybe a great co-founder for you, maybe somebody else who you can either bring as a co-founder or an early employee would be a tech guy, for example, right? So I think it's very important to have a diverse skill set on your team, because otherwise, I think it's a risk.
What would you recommend to a student that says maybe, I have an idea, where should I start from?
Look, I think ideas are great, but to be honest with you, I think that I think ideas are a very small part of a successful business.
Okay.
In my opinion. I mean, I think that I think that going from the idea to the execution is the key. And maybe this is a little bit my American mentality, but I think that ideas don't mean, because I think here in Spain, when people are a little bit, this is my experience. Maybe I'm wrong about this, but maybe it's that people are afraid that people are going to steal their ideas and these kind of. I mean, in the U.S., for example, it's a very different mentality. Nobody cares about this. I mean, you go to no VC will make you sign an NDA. They understand that ideas don't mean anything because and to be honest with you, a VC would rather invest in someone who has an idea, but there's other people doing it, right? Because it shows that there's other people who also think the idea is good,
okay,
right? Because I think at the end of the day, it's not just the idea, right? So it's the execution of that idea and how to get from the idea to a viable business, right? So I would say that somebody has a great idea. I think it starts with the idea, but make sure that this is something you really want to do, because because creating a business is hard. It's hard.
It's not decision making.
It's it's not a. It depends on what you want, what your goal is, right? I think that if you need to really want to create a business. I think that if you have a passion or very strong interest in finance, for example, just to speak about finance because that's my field, that doesn't mean that you should create a startup. I think it's a very different. Go work for a company. There's nothing. What's wrong with that? It's like. I think that in order to start up, you need to have you need to love finance, for example, if you want to create a FinTech startup, but you're going to be dealing with HR, you're going to be dealing with hiring, you're going to be dealing with tech, you're going to be dealing with accounting, you're going to be dealing with marketing. So make sure you understand that you're not going to be, just doing finance.
You're going to be comfort zone. You're going
to be doing everything, right? So, make sure that that's what you want to do, right? And I think that, this is I would say that, if you have an idea, I think to get it from, do your homework. It's not easy. So I would say that make sure that read as much as you can, and make sure that it's really something that you want to do, and then go for it.
Excellent, great. What would be your recommendation when making an assessment or a validation of a product or even your own business? Because, there are different stages where different investors can take place or can play part. So what would be your recommendation in this regards?
In terms
validation assessment.
Look, I think it's very important, obviously, the market validation. So I would say that, and keep in mind one thing, which is I think along the evolution of your company, the product is going to change, right? I think it's going to change multiple times. Maybe hundreds of times. Who knows, right? So I think that remember that. I think that at the very beginning, I think that what I would try to do is try to get as much market validation as possible,
okay,
with as little money spent as possible, right? Because I think what happens a lot of times, and this is something that I've come across with myself as well, is that sometimes you have this great idea, you think it's a great idea, and a lot of people tell you it's a great idea. When you're talking to your friends, they might think it's a great idea because, I don't know, they're your friends, whatever, right? So, but that doesn't mean that it's a great idea, and that doesn't mean that other people, especially if you're doing like a B2C company, for example, right? It doesn't mean, what you think is a great idea doesn't mean that's what people want, right? So I think that you have to make sure that there's not kind of you have to make sure that that your great idea is validated before you go out and before you go out and spend a ton of money, right? Because at the end of the day, the last situation you want to be in is you put in your capital, your sweat equity, you got some friends and family money in, and then afterwards you find out that nobody wants your product, right? Which is a disaster, right? So it happens a lot, right? So I think that I think that you need to do user testing. You need to get out as much as possible, talk to potential customers, because that's free, right? I mean, all these things are free, right? So make sure that you have some kind of fit and a demand for your product before you go out and start putting down a ton of money, right? So.
And also, I guess that investors like this, let's say, sensitive approach. And the idea behind the point I want to make is, what is your experience in dealing with the invested projects or managers or entities in this, let's say, in this track or this support along the time they have to report? What type of activities take place that will extract a demand time from startup managers?
Well, I think that depending on where you are in the stage of your startup, right? So I think that at the very beginning, probably less so, right? Because if it's a friends and family, then obviously it's friends and family, right? So at that point, you can probably get away with having an infrastructure which is less professional, right? I think that once you start getting to kind of angel investors maybe a little bit as well, but I think that once you pass that kind of early stage and you get to kind of what I call professional investors, it's a different ball game, right? At that point, I think that you have to have everything. I mean, everything has to be done properly, right? You need accountants, you need reporting, you need you need everything, right? So at that point, you need to either have that in-house or outsourced, right? Yeah. So I think that it depends on where you are in the startup. So I think that that's why I think that I think that when you get to the VC level, and you're going after kind of what I call professional money, you need to really have a well thought out business plan, business plan and infrastructure that you've created, right?
Do you think that incubators and accelerators help out to startup entrepreneurs to understand this structure that you?
I think so, but I think there's some good ones out there. I think some really good ones. I mean, I think in the U.S. you have a lot of good ones. I mean, Y Combinator is awesome. I think there's some, really good ones. I think here there's some coming. I think you have to be very. There's so many now, right? I mean, there's so many accelerators. So I think you have to be a little bit cautious, right? What they can offer. What they can the pros and cons, right? Because on one hand, I think there's a lot of benefit that can come from an accelerator program. Especially if you're kind of for example, if you were just a tech co-founder, or you have 2 guys or 3 guys who are just, engineers, and you have no experience in anything else. Yeah, I think an accelerator can help you a lot because they can provide you the kind of the other infrastructure that you may need to grow your business, right? On the other hand, they may take, 20% of your business, 50%. So you have to weigh it, right? I mean, it depends on, what you're willing to give up. Right. I mean, and there's always the dilemma of whether, if you can bring somebody in-house versus outsourcing as well, right? So I think it's in an ideal situation, a lot of if you had a diverse set of co-founders, I think it's great. And this is my personal experience because I'm going through this right now as well. So I think that it's, I think it's very important. I think it's very important.
In my experience, some startups at early stages are kind of sometimes desperate for financial support, and also they don't know the value of the intellectual property or whatever they have developed so far, and they accept these kind of deals that at later stages they would regret. Yeah. I don't know if you have experienced this.
Well, personally, no, but yeah, I mean, I definitely think so. So I think that's why you have to do your homework at the end of the day, right? I think it's very, very important that, I think an entrepreneur has to, it's very rare to find somebody who's an expert in 5 things. Well, or even one thing, most likely, right? But, but I mean, so I think that you need to really, it is a lot of work, and you need to surround yourself with people who can support you, and you have to be the type of person who's willing to look for those people, and there's a degree of self-motivation as well. I mean, there's a lot of resources out there now. I mean, without going to an accelerator, for example, I mean, you can find a lot of resources on the internet. I mean, tons of resources. I mean, seminar. I mean, a lot of acceleration programs even have webinars now, right? That you can even open to, so you can go through and basically go through an accelerator online, right? So, I think it's worth maybe doing some of that work before you formally decide to.
Yeah. And what do you think? Is it better to have a MVP, minimum viable product, and a prototype, or a market tested product before facing or approaching investment?
It depends on the stage. So I think that, again, I think if it's the first 2 stages, like friends, family, some angel, maybe not. Maybe not. I mean, maybe you need a good idea, people who believe in you, people who trust you, something like this. I think when you get to the venture capital, yes, I think it's important. Okay. I think it's important. I mean, look, I think that there's exceptions to every rule, right? But I think that in general, if you go to a VC with a PowerPoint, it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard. I think that if you go, at that point, you at least need a prototype that people can play around with. Ideally, you have some, kind of a minimum level of, metrics, user metrics that you can go to them with, right? Revenue, yeah, I mean, that's probably not as important maybe, but I think that you definitely need a product. You definitely need to show that you're able to gate this demand for that product, right?
What about traction or
user traction from users?
Yes, exactly. Or the speed of
it would be great. Yeah.
acceptance of that.
Look, I think the more you have, the better, right? The more you have, the better. I mean, I think that it's such a competitive world out there today that I think the more you have, the better, right? And I think especially if you're going after the VC money. But don't get me wrong. I mean, look, like you said, I mean, there's a lot of other sources of funding today. So I think angel investors may not need as much, for example, as a venture capital investor. There's crowdfunding, for example. There's
public subsidies sometimes.
There's loans out there,
loans,
exactly, from public entities, exactly. And there's a lot of kind of loose associations of investors that are it's kind of like not unions, but there's associations of lawyers and accountants and other kind of informal groups that are looking to pool together money to invest. So there's a lot of different channels that you can go through. But I think that if you're going after the venture capital money, I think you need to be.
Do you think that startups based with, let's say, a mobile app, let's say softwares or systems, are more successful than other type of?
Not necessarily.
No.
I mean, I think that it depends on the product. It depends on the product that you're trying to sell. I mean, I think that if you are, for example, in my case, where I think that when it's a dilemma. I mean, to be honest with you, I know it's something that we talk about a lot, actually, whether to do a web-based app or to go to mobile. But I think that if you're trying to probably get millennials, it also depends on your demographics, right? I mean, people are targeting different segments in the market. People are targeting. So, look, I mean, I think if you're targeting a 50-year-old or 60-year-old or 70-year-old with a mobile app, probably not going to work, right? I mean, on the other hand, who knows what? I think it depends. I think it depends on what you're trying to do.
True.
I mean, there's a clear shift. I mean, I think people these days, I think people use their mobiles, especially the younger people, use their mobiles as computers. They do everything on their mobile, right? So
24/7.
24/7. Yeah. So I mean, I think that clearly, if you're going after some of these guys, you need to have a mobile app, right? But the technology is changing so quickly, and this is something that I'm learning as well, because it's not my background. But I think that these days, I mean, you can build a web app, you can wrap into a mobile app. I mean, there's a lot of stuff that you can do to get it onto a phone that doesn't have to be native, right? So.
True. Since we are in Barcelona, do you think that first, like in the Mobile World Congress, with the 4 years from now fair, or do you think that this helps to to create this ecosystem that you mentioned, to give exposure to startups, but also to give space to interact with investors? What do you think this type of?
I have never been to the Mobile World, to be honest with you, but I went to the 4 years from now, which is the startup part of the kind of look, I think it's good. But I'm not sure. I mean, look, I think at the end of the day, this is not going to make or break a company, in my opinion. I mean, maybe you get lucky, but my experience there was kind of like, there's a lot of local investors, so that's good. There are a lot of local guys. I didn't see so many foreign investors there, but not that you need that, right? But it's a good place to kind of just mingle and meet people and kind of understand what's going on, and get a sense of kind of the pulse of the market, right? So I think it helps. I mean, I don't know how many people out. So I talking to my friends in New York and London. Not many people have heard of the 4 years from now, right? But the mobile world, yeah. I mean, of course, right? It's a kind of a it's kind of a
global.
It's a global thing, right? And look, I think that helps. I think it helps.
It's more, as you say, more PR, public relations.
Yeah, I think so. I think
being there, meeting point.
I mean, how many customers are you going to get just by being there? I think very few. I mean, but I think that, look, it's this world is about marketing, right? So
yeah,
I mean, it's I don't think it hurts.
Building your brand.
Building your brand, exactly. Getting your kind of name out there and into the press, and so.
Let's speak a little bit more about alternative financing sector. We spoke about the crowdfunding platforms. Are there any other alternatives here?
So yeah, I mean, I think that
are these your competitors, future competitors?
No. So I'm not competing in this space, but look, there's a lot of channels. I mean, at least in the world that I used to live in, in the non-startup world. I mean, there's definitely a lot of different types of financing opportunities that are coming up. It used to be, you either go for a bank loan, right? You go to a bank and get a bank loan, or you go to, or if you're a huge company, you go to the debt market and you issue a bond, right? After the crisis, this has changed a lot, right? I think that lending has dried up, and the banks are lending a lot less. So there's been kind of, I think in my old company, Treya, we launched a kind of a direct lending fund a few years ago, which is kind of a different. It's a fund that was created that lends directly to small and medium companies, so kind of bypassing the banking channel, right? Because the bank financing has dried up, right? That kind of fund will not lend to startups, right? but it's interesting. There's different ways. I think that technology will only increase the ways of raising financing, the access to financing, right? I mean, crowdfunding is a clear example. I'm not aware of a lot of other things right now that are happening, but I think that it will happen. It will happen.
And for sure, the entrepreneur has to have, ears and eyes very wide open to just to seek and to catch the opportunity when possible, right?
Yeah.
Good. What is the best time to request financing? Timing is relevant?
It depends what you need. I think, like I said before, I mean, I think that, when I don't think that you should raise financing for the sake of raising financing, because it doesn't make any sense for you, right? Because when you are raising financing, you're giving up something, and that's going to be part of the company, right? So if you don't need the money, don't take the money, right? So I think it depends on your business model, and I think it depends on where you are in your stage of your company, right? There's a lot of companies, for example, that are super high growth companies, like the kind of, you see this a lot, like, I mean, even the Ubers and all these, they raise massive amounts of financing to increase their revenue with the view of kind of exiting via IPO, but they're still losing money like crazy, right?
Okay.
I mean, so if you're in that kind of, that's your mentality, then raise money as much as you can, because that's your end game.
That's the goal.
That's the goal, right? Otherwise, be more cautious, right? I mean, don't raise financing unless you need financing. I mean, if you need, I think like you said, I mean, at the very beginning, what are your options? Think about all your options, right? I mean, if you don't have the money, if you have a great product, or a good idea and a decent kind of prototype or whatever, but you can't get from that point to the next point because you don't have enough money, you don't have the resources, then you have to raise financing. And it's clear, right? So then you need to do it then, right? But if you can do it yourself, because this is not...
But what happens if the dilemma is, okay, we are going abroad, so we are going international, but these are the resources we have, so the speed of growth will be this slow, and then some advisors, they will tell you, okay, bring money in, so the speed will be increased. I don't know.
I think growth is important, and I think that it's important to show that you are. If you're trying to go abroad, and you don't have money, and because of the lack of money, you're not growing, that's a problem. I mean, right? I mean, so I think that if your strategy is to start here, create something small here, and then grow abroad, you need to raise money. Unless you want to somehow have the ability to fund it yourself, but very unlikely, right? So in a situation like that, you need to raise money as soon as you can, right? To grow abroad, right?
What are the alert signs that your strategy is not working?
So I think, well, look, I mean, if you're raising if you raise financing and your metrics are not whatever metrics you may use for your business are not improving, your revenue is not growing, you're probably going to want to rethink your entire strategy, obviously, and not to mention the fact that you're not going to raise more financing, right? So I think it's very clear.
Excellent. So yeah, getting down to the last questions. Well, we spoke about, let's say, different players. We spoke about the ecosystem. I am waiting for questions through Twitter. Let's speak about your project, because then I think our audience will connect. Okay, I have an idea, I have my background, I have my own resources, and then this is kind of a live decision making. So you want to create a business to help out and make it easier, no? For small investors to invest in a portfolio that can combine medium and small-sized companies and also startups. Did you say?
No, so I'm not. So my idea is, maybe I wasn't very clear about this, but so my idea really hasn't. My focus hasn't been. So one side is as a private investor, right, and that side is different. I think it's investing in as an angel or whatever. But what I'm talking about in the business itself is a little bit different. So I think that what I really want to focus on is helping people. Users invest their money well, Okay. So my idea is really to create a product, and when I say product, I basically mean like a digital product, right? So it can be a mobile app, it could be a web-based app, it could be any type of digital product, right? Which allows investors to take whatever money they've saved. Well, one part is to help them save money. Okay, so and there's other people in the market who are doing similar things, right? So I think it's I want to create a product which allows investors or people to save save money in an easy way, okay, without really having to think about it, and then taking that money and other money they may already have saved and investing it well. Okay, and when I say investing it well, what do I mean? What I mean is in a very transparent way, so they know exactly what they're investing in, not charging them any fees for investing in the portfolios. The portfolios themselves will be low cost. So the things that I'm going to be investing in are very low cost. They're diversified, so you don't have a lot of risk in one particular asset, and everything will be very simple and easy to use through app. So this is what I want to do, and the way I'm basically thinking about doing it is either create this entire infrastructure myself, right, or potentially collaborate with someone who has already kind of built out a part of that platform, the technology platform, perhaps, right? So, let's see how it goes. I'll keep you. I can't say much more right now, but I think that I think it's going to go one of those two ways, right? And I think that it's important because I think that I think it's something that and in talking to people out there, and I've done a lot of kind of testing on this, is that people do want to be able to, people don't know what to do with their money, and they don't.
There is a real concern.
There's a
right, on finding a friendly tool to invest and rely on the well management of your investment.
And I think a part of that is education. It's a big part of that is education and content. Right, so on one side you have to have a simple, a portfolio, the investment side. But a big part of that is educating people on why they need to invest. What they, what are the benefits of investing? How to invest? What is a portfolio? I mean, a lot of people don't even know these things, which is fine because I think what happens is that when you're so absorbed in one particular field, like me in finance or somebody else in tech, they don't realize that the rest of the world doesn't understand what you're talking about, right? And I think a lot of this creates kind of a barrier, So when you start talking about like portfolios and investing, people all of a sudden just don't understand what you're talking about. So you have to make it. You have to be able to create something that's easy to understand. If they don't understand it, you have to explain to them what it is. You have to create trust. You have to create kind of you have to give confidence that for people, right?
And also the story that you mentioned, right? And you said that you have experience in emerging markets. I know that we have plenty of students from Latin America. Will your platform tool help out startups in other continents?
Yeah, so this is the idea. I mean, my idea is whatever I decide to do, I would like to move it on to other regions, countries. I think Latin America is a natural fit for Spain, right? Because I think the language, for example, obviously, right? I mean, I think it's that's a clear synergy between Latin America and Spain. So I think there's a natural kind of, I think a lot of Spanish startups, their natural next step is Latin America, for example. So I think that the idea would be, you have to keep in mind one thing, which is it's a very regulated industry, right? So you can't, it's not like selling oranges, right? I mean, you can't just, I think it's, every country has their regulations. Every country has their kind of, financial watchdog, right? So there's a process that you have to go through, right? So when you create something in Spain, you're regulated by the CNMV, right? On the investment side. So, you can't create a product here that can be used necessarily for somebody who's a resident of Mexico, for example, because there's regulatory issues. But anyway, these are all things that can be worked through, and these are all things to think about. But it absolutely makes sense.
Also, I guess that there is the tax issue.
There's tax issues. Right? There's tax issues. There's regulatory issues. Yeah. Well, yeah, exactly. So you're going to have to create a kind of a local infrastructure in each of these countries, right? And but yeah, it's doable. The product itself can be very similar. right? The technology. You may have to find different
concept.
the concept. I mean, obviously, you may need to find, and this is why it's important to make it scalable, right? I mean, you need to be able to create something which is as scalable as possible, whether that means, there's different parts, right? I mean, there's a lot of moving pieces, which I won't get into now. But I mean, I think that the more of the parts of the kind of the puzzle that you can make scalable, the better, right? So if you can find a vendor or a service provider who can not only provide that service in Spain but also provide it in every country, go with that, right? So I think that's very important.
Excellent. I would like to know if the audience here has any question. Do you want to ask anything to the expert? Don't be shy. No? Sure? Okay, let me check if we have any question before closing.
Sure.
It seems that it's lunchtime, at least in Spain, so it's a tough hour.
Yeah.
Okay, let me then launch the last question. I myself, I am a marketing consultant, and also obviously I advise companies, and I've been a mentor for several startups. But then when it comes to finance, it's kind of not the black sheep, but it's hard to integrate this field of management into let's say the best scheme or the first scheme of the entrepreneur, because we speak about business model, we speak about getting the MVPs, the prototypes, your team, the flows, the processes. But then finances, it seems that it's very technical. And then
I think people have there is definitely some kind of barrier when it comes to maybe not finance, investing specifically, right?
Yeah,
and I think corporate finance. I mean, finance is broad, right? I mean, in finance you can put a lot of things. I mean, there's corporate finance. There's even accounting. You can maybe put it. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. People use that word for a lot of things, right? But specifically when it comes to investing, I think there's a definite barrier there. I mean, it's like people just don't. It's like I always say, it's kind of funny because in school they teach you all this stuff that you'll never use again in your life. I mean, calculus, physics. I mean, unless you're a physicist, obviously. I mean, you go through all this process, which is great, I think, because it teaches you how to think. But some of the more practical skills that you'll need in life, right? Personal finance being one of them, right? How to invest your own money. You never see that anywhere, and this doesn't go for Spain, but this is also in the U.S., right? I mean, you don't, these kind of courses, which I think are the most valuable, probably in a practical sense, right? You never find them anywhere, and I think because of this, people just don't, people are just scared about when they talk about investing, they don't know what to, you start talking, it's like you're talking a different language. Right, so I think that maybe even for people who are so it has nothing to do. So this is something that I find, which has nothing to do with education, because I find in my family and my wife, people who are highly educated, PhDs, doctors, lawyers. When you start talking about finance, they have no idea what they're talking about, right? And they say, "Where's your money? It's in the bank." No, but so I think that there is this kind of.
Is it an attitude, or is it that?
I think it's education. It's an educational process, and I think that's something that's, like I said, it all comes back to education. Okay. Because I think, for example, to give you an example in the U.S., for example, I think there's you're bombarded through marketing, through TV, you're bombarded more with finance, investing in the stock market, blah blah blah, whatever it is, right? So people who are not necessarily very educated still have some idea of finance, right? You know what I'm saying? So, yes. but so I think it has to be a question of education, right? So because I think it's, it's not complicated, the stuff that I'm talking about. I mean, I can say that, but I'm telling you, it's not super complicated. It's just that people have I think there's also some kind of, when it comes to money, people are a little bit fearful because they don't. It's also because you work for money. You're working, you're earning money. So there's, you realize, I think there's a kind of a distrust there, right? Of people who have something to do with money because you don't want to lose it,
Of course.
right? So I think it's a process.
And do you think that this sense of risk is enhanced or is even bigger when we speak about startups? Because you spoke about the stock market,
Yeah.
so it's like big corporations, but startup is,
Look, I mean, I think inherently, a startup is risky,
it is.
super risky, right? I mean, the statistics are clear. But I think it's a different type of risk, maybe. I think that, I think a startup is a high risk of failing. But I think when I'm talking about, I think the financial, in terms of investing particularly, and in terms of kind of the whole financial sector, I think the financial crisis caused I think there was a lot of damage done after the financial crisis because people saw the headlines, all all the guys who were, there was a lot of bad press, right? But there's a lot of bad press, but nobody was held accountable for it finally. Right, so I think that people it didn't help. Let's put it that way.
It's more reluctant to.
I think there was a reluctance to kind of trust the big players, maybe. So I think that, and I think that some of the young, and I think this is where the younger mentality is a little bit different, perhaps, in the sense that I think that, at least I see it among people I know who are in that kind of the 20s to 30s, early, is that I think they're willing to try something new. They're willing to, do things online and on their phone, and even transfer money. I mean, they're willing to do things that the older generation maybe, and I'm not saying that I'm super old, but we weren't willing to do before, right? And and they never and they won't do, right? So I think it's an opportunity there.
Yeah, for sure. And also I think that all the startups that are out there, they are showing these trends, and companies, they have to understand that, and also if they decide that these are the target groups, then be coherent with that.
Yeah.
Good, excellent. Let's see if there is a very last second question. If not, we will be closing here. Thank you, Rohit, for all this conversation, and also for providing more insights. And I think that you have given more solid-based opinions, and also you are inviting us to break the ice and face and approach investment in a more prepared way, but also without fear, but also with the homework done. So it's kind of a combination of this, right? Get fit, get ready, and find the best timing, and also if you don't